Hello, Internet. This is Brown Truck. Meet Brown Truck, Internet. I built this over the last couple of weeks using two pieces of shit. This was a gas truck that I bought for nothing because it didn't run. It had a 460 and a C6 in it. Pulled that out. Had another junk, like 7.3 truck. Pulled the engine and transmission out of that and converted this to a diesel with a 5-speed from, originally being an automatic. In the front, I did a shackle reversal to bring the ride height up to where it was fairly level, but realistically my bigger plan was just to make it ride better. Built a bumper on the front of it, threw some bigger tires on it. Nothing out of the ordinary really. It's just supposed to be a farm truck. It's not supposed to be anything like super special or fancy. It just needs to work. So I did a pretty piss poor job of what?
The dogs.
Yeah, I don't give a shit about the dogs. They're fighting at your feet. So. We do horses and dogs and sheep
Okay, hey, enough.
and apparently vicious wild dogs. But we'll probably cut all that out.
I like it. It gives it flavor.
Flavor, huh? I don't know what. So the plan for this truck is we're actually building another property out. So we're developing a piece of land, and I need something that I can tow a dump trailer off road. I have a like 14,000 pound dump trailer that I've been dragging around with our King Ranch and destroying it, and the old brown truck here has been sitting in the backyard for several years, looking pretty trashy, so I dug it out with the intentions of basically hooking it to that trailer full time. We've got to move a bunch of dirt from one side of a mountain to the other, and I've got to go over the top of that mountain. And we got to fell a bunch of trees in the process and build some roads, so that's really the main point of this build. Something that can stay on the farm and facilitate that purpose now, but then eventually just become kind of the work truck on the farm. So it doesn't need to be fast, it doesn't need to have a ton of power, it just needs to work right. But I did a pretty poor job of filming up until this point, so I've gone ahead and built the bumper, did the lift, did the engine conversion and wiring harness and all that stuff. Didn't really document any of that properly, but hopefully from here on out I'll do a better job of showing you guys what I do. Alright, so I have to bend up a brush guard for this, and firstly you have to understand about me, I don't really plan anything out. I'm kind of one of those wing it people. Used to piss people off because they want to know what I was building, but I had no clue until I did it. So that's basically where we're at with this. I have several different ideas in my head of how I want to build this, but one way I want to do it that I've never done before is I kind of want to build 2 individual hoops on the side and then have those tie in to the grill guard as it goes across. I don't know if it's going to look good or not, but theoretically, I built bumpers where the tube comes around the side and then comes back in here, and then you end up putting in like a brace there and it looks great. I want to basically do that same thing, but I want this to be one single piece with 2 bends on each side and then have this taper back into it. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So first thing, before I cut any tube or any of that stuff, I'm just going to take this tape measure and I'm going to use it as a reference for the shape that I'm going to make. So I want this thing to be somewhere around in there. I know I've got like 17 inches to the first apex of the bend, and then I've got roughly 44 inches, 42 inches or so to the point where I want the second apex to be. And then from there, it looks like I'm about 58 down to the bumper. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this first piece right at the 60-inch mark. That'll give me a couple inches of rough cut off at the end, and I can kind of sink it to whatever height that I want. So we got a 4.5-inch die. I already measured up basically the height that I want. Came to 17 inches at the apex, so I went ahead and just subtracted 4.5 and we ended up with like a 12.5-inch mark here. So when you slide this into the bender, here, come over here and look. So like, come around on this other side. So like in this bender here, you have your start stop on the die. It's actually not usually at the front, so line it up with the mark. Get our pins in place. Completely move the bender so that you're not keyed in the right spot anymore. That's important. Line up our follower over here on the degree die. And I have no clue what angle I'm going to go to on this. I'm just kind of shooting this in the dark. We'll probably pull it out of the bender a couple of times and mock it up and see how it looks. Like I said, I don't really go into this with any kind of plan in mind. Anybody who says that you can't manually bend tubing or you have to have a hydraulic bender is fucking lazy. So we're definitely going to go past 90. Probably going to be someplace in the 110, 115 degree range.
Now it's at 97.
110.
103 probably. 105.
Alright. So I'm going to stop there, but before I pull this out of the bender so that I can key it back in the right spot, you can line these up all day long, but if you'll just take your marker and just literally just trace this front corner here, all you have to do then is make sure that it's lined up on both axes, and it'll go back in the same spot and you won't end up with a funky bend. So come over here and lock this up. I think I'm going to keep going, probably another 20 degrees. So we're at 125 now. That's about like what I want. So it's way too much on that side, so we're not going to go nearly as far with our next bend. I'll probably go like 110. So at the end of your bend, you're going to have like, there's a spot where the bend actually starts to pull around the mandrel, and it deforms the tube slightly, even though this is supposed to, not deform it at all. It does nonetheless. So you actually have to use your finger. Sometimes you can visually see it, but usually you have to feel it. And if you'll make a mark there, that's going to be the stop point of your bend. It's going to be a good reference to start your measurement from one to the next. So I have that as a reference. I basically know that I want this to come roughly this far forward, and if it is going to sit here, that's going to be there. If I can handle this goat rope, that's going to be there. So we're going to have something right around in that spot. The good thing about not having a pre-planned idea, you can go all Bob Ross on this stuff, and you make mistakes, it's not the end of the world. You can just kind of feel it out as you go. Makes the whole process a whole lot more fun. So that ended up being like 13 and a quarter. We're gonna go ahead and pop that back to 13 even. So, quite as far this end. Kind of like time lapse. Alright, so I went ahead and finished out that pinhole, which took us basically to like 112. I think I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go one more pinhole. Take us up to 115. Another word of advice, when you're buying Sharpies, buy blue ones, not black ones. They last a whole lot longer when you're writing on steel. I don't know why, but they do. There it is. So that lands right at the back side there, right at the front side there, and it looks like we have probably about 12 inches to chop out of it. But now that I have all my measurements, I can just basically duplicate this, but I'll know where to cut it first, so my next piece I don't have to cut nearly as long and I won't have as much scrap. Alright, so I want to figure out basically where I want this on the grill. So at this point, you know, I can look at where it lands on the body and so on, but more importantly I want to know where my tube is going to be across here in relation to this tube here. And this isn't perfectly level. This actually sweeps up slightly and sweeps this way up slightly, so I need to take that into consideration. But if you look at it here, I'm 15 inches to the top of that part right here, but I don't actually want to be at the top. I want to be slightly lower. So I'm going to go for like 13 and a half, 14 inches there. If I switch my optical like position here, basically we're 13 inches at that corner above the headlight. So if I move over here, we're about 12 and a half, so there's a half-inch difference between the two. So I go ahead and plan for this to be at 13. It gives a little bit of room to still cut. I'm going to go from the bottom side of this tube to the 13 mark. There. And there. So, if you don't move it after you set it, that's always helpful. So, make my marks. There and there. Now, I know what my angles are going to be, and I know basically what... So this is a pretty janky way to do this, but if you can basically keep both of your tubes in line with each other with the blade, because when you do this you can't put it in the guide. You just gotta, you know, go full send with it and hope you don't kill anybody. But, and you know, I'm supposed to tell you don't try this at home and all that bullshit, but do whatever you can do. If you want to cut it in a vise with a freaking angle grinder, you're probably safer. Hand that marker right there real quick. You know, always ask your camera woman to do stuff for you instead of just doing it yourself. There it is. So now we've got that tube bent. We'll copy that. So now you have your piece bent and you have your original piece that you did. So a speed square works really well for this. You can go through there and square it all up. Basically just go through and hit the edges until it's all symmetrical. Alright, got that all perfect. Get your pin and make your marks on your tube. And then, those are perfect. Dogs, you're all gonna go deaf. Be like your daddy.
I demand hearing protection.
You demand?
Mm-hmm.
I don't own any. Valentine's Day gifts.
Excellent.
Get you some hearing protection, maybe some eye protection. Also the OSHA, I'm sure that they probably have like a gift bag. A whole basket. Nice.
You flip it.
Flip it. They are the same. Cool. Everybody needs some sheep for help. Some shippers. These are the shippers. This is Mike and Ike. They think they're dogs.
Hey, sheepies.
The dogs also think that they're dogs. It's our pet bird flying in and out of the garage. We basically just have animals everywhere. Another little trick, if you're going to mock things up to make them symmetrical, is I went ahead and clamped, basically like this is working as like a straight edge on this flat surface here. And then I basically inset this. This is 1.5 inches. This is on a 2-inch tube, so there's like a 1/2 inch variance. But we're in the middle of this bend, so typically it'd be like a 1/4 inch to center it, top to bottom. But because this is inset just slightly further, I went ahead and just grabbed like a 1/2 inch drill bit and stuck it in the top here. Whenever I duplicate this on the other side, so that it ends up being the exact same, I can set this up in the mirror image. So both sides will be the exact same angle.
I'm closing my eyes.
Another thing that I see people fuck up on all the time when they're tack welding is they like put their tack weld where it's easiest to get to. But you want to plan where your stops and starts are going to be. So, like, let's say you have this piece of tube, you want a continuous weld. Like, come over here where people can see better. So, if I was going to weld this out, I would probably start here and I would have a continuous weld that would come all the way around, and it would probably stop over here and I'd get another angle and come into it. You want to make sure that your tack weld is where your stop start is, not like midway through your weld. Otherwise you're going to be welding and then all of a sudden you're going to come over more material that wasn't there on other parts, and it's going to make the weld not look uniform. So like for instance on these, you would put your tack weld in the corners rather than putting it in the middle. Like up here, whenever I welded this or tacked this in place, I put a tack weld here and I put a tack weld here on these two back sides. I went ahead and started my weld and then continued it over this corner. So I welded this out as one continuous weld all the way around, rather than having a weld or tack in the way. Same thing here. So you know, I could have continued that around. I'm gonna wait to weld this one until it's on the ground and I can get it at a different angle, but just be mindful of that. I see people tack weld in the dumbest places. Just have a little bit of forethought. It'll make your welds look a lot better. So on this one, I'm gonna put it on this back side right here, so that it's not in the way. Those would be my two stop-start points. I already bent up another piece with this angle in it, and the idea is going to be in this section here and this section here have that same profile, and then I'll basically connect the nodes. So to figure out on this piece, so this is the piece that I have that I've bent up. The way to go about this is to line up your profile. So if I'm at the top of where I want my tube to be, and I'm at the outer edge of where the cut line needs to be, so I want this to line up basically down here at the bottom of that and at the top of this, roughly. And I can bring it down and chop away a little bit at a time to get it where I want it, because I may not want this tube to go uphill, but for our initial cut, get you a speed square, and I'm just going to basically line up the horizon from that tube over here to get my angle. So right there is about where I want it. I'm at 7 inches here, and I'm at 10.5 inches there. So from there, I would come over here to my piece of tubing, and this being the top of my line, it's going to go to the top of the tube, so it's going to go to the outside. I'm going to push this forward from that point, making sure that I stay horizontal there until I line up my 10.5 mark. So come over with the camera. You can basically see that's the 10.5 mark, and if you look directly over the top of it, it's just touching the tube. So I'm going to make a mark right there, and I'm not going to make it straight this way, I'm not going to make it straight up and down this way. This is just the tip. Now we have to take into consideration the angle of the bumper, but we don't know what that angle is yet. So at 7 inches here and at 10 inches there, I can make 2 cuts. Once I make those cuts, I can fit the piece of tubing into place, and then I can get my angle here. And for instance, like where this notch is, I know for a fact that's less than 1.5 inches. So I'm going to have to notch into this, and I think I'm going to end up bringing this down where the top of the tube is actually going to sit at the top of that. So I'm going to need an angle there, and I'm going to need an angle there. Now that I got my piece cut, I can literally just lay it up there and mark it out. After making those marks, I made my cuts, and our tube lines up just like so. So what I need to do now is bend up another piece just like this one. I'll copy this directly to that. That way I'll have a second one to fit on this side, and then I'll tack them in place. I want to have this as my template before I fix it to the truck. The next step is I've got to build a bar that goes around these. So I'm going to mark it out on the ground and show you a pretty easy way to figure out like something that has to be exact. So like up to this point, I've just basically been ball marking stuff, which makes things really easy. But and you actually have to fit something in between, you really do have to do the legwork. So I've already measured from here to the other side. We have 74 3/4. So first thing I'm going to do on my straight edge here that I've laid out is mark 74 3/4. We have basically our two outside endpoints, which is if this corner on each side was this point, from there we have to measure out and find the distance that this is from our center line of our tube here. So if I look across the end of this, realistically it's in line with the edge of the hood. So I can basically take my tape measure here and I can come out. We're going to make it right at 14.5 inches. That's going to be the back side of my tube. So I'm going to make a line there. I'll make a line here. And a line here. So I'm just going to make this my reference point. So that's lined up there. Thankfully my floors are very uneven, so I can do that. Put our center line from this out to here. So this is 37 inches on there. So 18.5. So we'll measure out 18.5. Mark. Now, from that corner to this corner, draw you a straight edge. Okay. So this is basically the profile of the inside of our tube. So whenever I go to bend this, the tubing is going to run along this angle here and then to here. So I need to find out what this angle is so that I know what to bend it at on my bender. When you first get your bender and your die, a really good idea is to go ahead and like bend up a 90 and 180 in your die, like unless you don't have a 180 degree die, but and just have them in the shop because they're really good for layout in this kind of thing. I don't currently have mine here, it's sitting in my scrap bin. So what I have here is an angle finder. So I laid this out, I then flipped it upside down on my workbench, found out this angle, it's 32 degrees. And then I do happen to have like 2 pieces of tube here that already have my profile in them.
You said it was 37 degrees.
Or 37 degrees, thank you. You can lay this up here on the flat edge and then find where your angle finder lands here and then the center point of your bend there and then just measure between the two. So in this instance, we're right at 1 5/8. So what you would have if you had your piece of tubing is you could just lay it in there, and where the flat edge here is, you could line it up to where it intersects here in your bend. But I can't do that, so I'm doing it this way. So 1 5/8 from each side. Thank you, Yam. Oh, I appreciate it. Am I at your level for once? I know. This is very difficult with you guys in my way.
So many helpers.
So many
Come here,
helpers.
Yammy. Come here, Gracie.
So now that I have those marks, I can come in here with my tape measure, which I've lost.
You kicked it. It's over there.
And I can measure from this corner to this, which gives me a measurement of 22 inches. So I know once I cut this piece of tube that the start of my bend, whenever I put it in the bender, is at 32 inches from the end.
32 or 22?
22. I will actually measure this stuff out and get it right whenever I write it down, but yes, thank you. This ended up being 84, so I cut this tube at 86, so that gives us an extra inch on each side. I'm going to bend from the center out rather than from the ends in, since we have the extra material, and then I'll cut it to the correct size once it's in place. So with this being 86, we're going to go to 43. And then from the inside of this bend to here is, it's like 16 5/8. 16 5/8. So. Watch out, buddy. I can't see.
Yeah.
Yummy. Come on, buddy. So, in the bender, you want to make sure that the die is pulling the tube away from our mark. One thing that I always have a problem with is laying this stuff out, bending one side one direction and then screwing up and going the opposite way. So I already bent up the tube, I notched both sides and basically like laid it across the top of this, and then looking down I traced out where the tube is gonna French into this. So now I'm gonna take the cutoff wheel and I'm gonna carve out this piece of tube, and I'm gonna basically whittle it away until the crossbar sits level and square.
You need help?
No, let me see a minute. I might be able to get it on the seal. There you go. I'm just going through and marking where it's touching so that I can get it to fit a little bit tighter. Let's see if I can. Yeah, there it goes. Looks pretty good, actually. I can tack that in place. So, here it is all done. I basically Frenched it in on these sides and then just tied it in on the sides here. I don't know what else to say about it.
You tack welded it?
Yeah,
You have to completely weld it tomorrow?
yeah, I mean, I still have more tube to run. So the idea is from here, I'm probably going to have another bar start here and come across, basically splitting these two lights, and then same on the side. And I'll probably use a smaller tube, like 1.25 inches. This is 1.5 inches with 120 volt. So I'm pretty happy with that. I may build like a little gusset here, because there's going to end up being a pipe rack across the top of this thing. So if I built a little gusset there, that'd clean that up, and I could cut a little hole in it and have it for like a ratchet strap to hook into. And then I also plan to build like a whole bunch of pipe fencing. And one of the things that I've run into whenever I build pipe fencing is it's nice to have like pull points off your vehicle. So welder will be in the back of the truck. I'll have my plasma and compressor and all that stuff set up. So basically, as I'm going through in the field and building the fence, this will work as my like workshop. And this will be pulled up along like the fence line. And so once you get your posts in place and you like notch your fish mouth, you've got to get like 30-foot long 2 3/8 pipe. And if there's a bend in the fence, or if it goes over a hill or whatever, you've got to use like ratchet straps to pull the tubing or the pipe into place. And I want a bunch of like hook points on my truck that I can hook that pipe to and manipulate it with. A lot of the times I'm doing that stuff by myself.